It was a quiet evening in Cedar View, the kind of night where the streets hummed with the usual rhythm of life. The glow of street lights illuminated a small-town community that was no stranger to unspoken struggles. But on this particular night, a routine traffic stop was about to ignite a battle that would shake the very foundation of the Cedar View Police Department. Jessica Simpson, the newly appointed chief of police, had been on the job for only a few months. She had stepped into her role with a clear purpose: to bring justice and integrity to a department riddled with deep-rooted corruption. For years, many of Cedar View's officers had operated with unchecked authority, enforcing the law with biases that disproportionately affected black residents. Jessica knew that real change would not come easily, but she was ready for the fight. That evening, as she drove through town, she noticed flashing red and blue lights in the distance. A traffic stop. Something about the scene unsettled her. Two officers, both standing over a young black man, their postures tense. The man's hands were raised slightly, his face lined with frustration and fear. Jessica pulled over, stepping out of her vehicle. She walked toward the scene, her presence commanding attention. "What's going on here?" Jessica's voice was steady, but firm. Officer Taylor, a seasoned veteran of the force, turned to her, his expression unreadable. "Routine stop, Chief. Just handling business." Jessica's eyes shifted to the young man. "Is there a problem, sir?" she asked him directly. The young man hesitated, then spoke. "I was pulled over for a broken tail light. I didn't even know it was out." Jessica turned back to Taylor. "And yet, here you are with your hand on your holster, as if this man is a threat." Taylor's jaw tightened. "Just being cautious, Chief. You never know." Jessica took a slow breath, controlling the anger rising within her. She had heard this excuse too many times. "That is not how we do things anymore," she said, her voice unwavering. "This department is here to serve and protect, not intimidate and harass." Taylor scoffed. "With all due respect, Chief, this is how we've always done things in Cedar View." Jessica's eyes darkened. "Then it is time for that to change." She turned to the young man. "You are free to go. Get your tail light fixed when you can." Taylor's face burned with frustration, but he said nothing as the young man got back into his car and drove away. Jessica knew what she had just done was not simply correcting one officer's behavior. She had drawn a line in the sand. She had declared that the old way of doing things, the unchecked power, the intimidation, the injustice, would no longer be tolerated under her leadership. But she also knew that Taylor and those like him would not take this lightly. Jessica had spent years fighting for justice, but Cedar View was her most challenging battle yet. She had taken the role of chief, knowing that corruption ran deep within the department. Officers who had been on the force for decades operated with impunity, covering for each other and silencing those who dared to challenge them. She had expected resistance. She had expected hostility. But she had not expected the level of defiance that was about to come her way. Within days of the incident, whispers began circulating through the department. Officers who had once been cordial now regarded her with suspicion. Taylor, emboldened by years of unchecked authority, made no secret of his disdain for her leadership. "She's going to ruin this department," he told his allies. "She doesn't understand how things work around here." Jessica, however, refused to be intimidated. She called a mandatory department-wide meeting, standing before her officers with unwavering conviction. "We are here to serve the people of Cedar View," she declared. "Not just some people, all people. If anyone in this department believes they are above accountability, they are mistaken. I will not tolerate corruption, discrimination, or abuse of power." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some officers shifted uncomfortably. Others, like Taylor, folded their arms, their expressions defiant. Jessica's gaze swept over the room. "You have a choice," she continued. "Either stand with me in creating a department that is built on integrity and justice, or step aside. I will not be deterred." As the meeting concluded, Jessica knew that her words had not reached everyone. There were those who would resist her reforms at every turn. But she also saw glimmers of hope. Officers who wanted change, who had long been silenced by a toxic culture, but now felt the stirrings of something different. Jessica was not naive. She knew that dismantling corruption would come at a cost. What she did not yet realize was just how high that cost would be. In the days that followed the department-wide meeting, Jessica found herself at the center of a brewing storm. The resistance among veteran officers was stronger than she had anticipated. Rumors swirled through the station, accusations that she was trying to dismantle the department, claims that she was siding with the public over her own officers. She knew that change would be met with opposition, but the hostility she faced was not just about policies. It was personal. She had challenged a system that had existed for decades, and those who had thrived within it were not willing to let go of their power without a fight. One evening, as she sat in her office reviewing reports, there was a knock at her door. She looked up to see Officer Emma Carter and Officer Daniel Jacobs standing in the doorway. "Chief, do you have a minute?" Emma asked hesitantly. Jessica gestured for them to come in. "Of course. What's on your mind?" Emma glanced at Jacobs before speaking. "We just want you to know that not all of us are against you. Some of us joined this department because we wanted to make a real difference. But it is not easy." Jessica set her pen down and leaned forward. "Tell me." Jacobs exhaled sharply. "There are a lot of officers who do not want things to change. They talk about you behind your back. Some are even saying they will refuse to follow orders if it means changing the way they have always done things." Jessica nodded. This was exactly what she had suspected. Emma hesitated before adding, "And there is something else. Some of them are trying to push you out." Jessica's expression darkened. "Push me out? How?" "They are waiting for you to make a mistake," Jacobs explained. "They think if they can get the mayor or city council to turn against you, they can force you to resign." Jessica leaned back in her chair, absorbing their words. She had known that her fight would not be easy, but hearing this confirmed that she was walking into a battlefield far more dangerous than she had imagined. She exhaled slowly. "Thank you for telling me this," she said. "But I need you both to promise me something. Stay vigilant. Do not let fear silence you. The only way we change this system is by standing together." Emma and Jacobs exchanged glances before nodding. "We are with you, Chief," Emma said firmly. As they left, Jessica sat in silence for a moment, staring at the stack of reports in front of her. She had made it clear that she would not back down, but she was beginning to understand just how much was at stake. If they wanted a fight, she would give them one. Jessica wasted no time implementing the first phase of her reforms. She introduced stricter policies on the use of force, mandatory bias training, and a system for reviewing complaints against officers. She also created an anonymous hotline where residents could report misconduct without fear of retaliation. The backlash was immediate. "This is a joke," Taylor scoffed one afternoon, loud enough for others to hear. "What is next? Are we supposed to ask criminals politely if they would like to be arrested?" A few officers laughed, but others remained silent. Jessica noticed. There was a divide forming within the department, and while some officers clung to the old ways, others were beginning to question them. She confronted Taylor directly. "If doing the right thing is a joke to you, then you are in the wrong profession." Taylor's smirk faded. "With all due respect, Chief, you do not get to come in here and change everything overnight. We have been doing this job for years." Jessica met his gaze without flinching. "Then it is time you start doing it right." Word of Jessica's policies spread beyond the department, reaching the people of Cedar View. For the first time in years, residents felt like someone was listening. Community meetings became more frequent, and more people showed up each time, eager to share their experiences, their frustrations, and their hopes. One night, during a public forum, an elderly black man stood up. His voice was steady but filled with pain. "I have lived in this town for over 60 years, he said, "and in all that time, I have never trusted the police. Not once. But now, I want to believe things can be different. I want my grandchildren to grow up in a town where they do not have to be afraid." Jessica felt a lump form in her throat. This was why she fought. Not for power, not for personal recognition, but for people like him. As the meeting ended, a woman approached her. "Be careful," she warned. "Not everyone wants change. Some people will do anything to stop it." Jessica already knew that. But she also knew one thing for certain. She was not going anywhere. She was just getting started. Jessica knew that enacting real change would be met with hostility, but the level of resistance from within the department exceeded her expectations. Every new policy she implemented was met with quiet defiance, delayed paperwork, officers refusing to attend training sessions, and even outright complaints to city officials about her leadership. One morning, as she entered her office, she found an envelope on her desk with no name on it. She opened it cautiously, unfolding a single sheet of paper. Jessica exhaled slowly, gripping the letter. It was not a direct threat, but the message was clear. Someone, or perhaps multiple people, wanted her gone. She refused to be intimidated. If anything, this only solidified her determination. That day, she called a meeting with her most trusted officers, including Emma and Jacobs. "We are making progress," she said, holding up the letter. "And that is why they are scared." Jacobs clenched his jaw. "This is unacceptable. Whoever did this is a coward." Emma looked concerned. "Chief, this could escalate. If they are willing to intimidate you like this, they might do worse." Jessica nodded. "I know, but we cannot back down. This is exactly why we are here. To break this toxic culture and rebuild this department the right way." She could see the fire in their eyes. They were ready to stand by her, no matter the risks. Despite the resistance, change was beginning to take root. Officers like Emma and Jacobs were setting examples, and younger recruits were more open to the new policies. Slowly but surely, Jessica's vision was coming to life. The impact extended beyond the station. In Cedar View, residents were starting to feel a difference. Reports of unnecessary force were declining, and more people felt comfortable approaching officers. During a patrol, Jacobs was stopped by a young black teenager who hesitated before speaking. "Are things really changing?" he asked, his voice cautious. Jacobs smiled. "We are trying, but change does not happen overnight." The boy nodded. "Well, for what it is worth, I feel safer now than I used to." Moments like these reassured Jessica that she was on the right path. But not everyone was convinced. One evening, while driving home, Jessica noticed a car following her. She changed lanes, and the car did the same. Her heart pounded. She had spent years enforcing the law. Now, she was the target. Taking a sharp turn, she pulled into a gas station, watching as the car sped past her. She memorized the license plate before reaching for her phone. She would not be intimidated. The next morning, she filed a report, ensuring that whoever was behind this knew she was not afraid. Weeks later, Jessica's reforms were put to the test when a major incident rocked Cedar View. A young black man named Andre Harris was wrongfully detained by an officer, despite Jessica's policies against racial profiling. The situation escalated, and Andre was forcefully restrained. The news spread like wildfire. Protests erupted, and tensions soared. Jessica did not hesitate. She immediately launched an internal investigation, suspending the officer involved. She then held a public town hall, where she stood before an angry crowd. "I will not defend what happened," she said. "It was wrong, and I promise you, I will not allow injustice to thrive in this department." The room fell silent. For the first time, a police chief was not making excuses. A woman in the crowd crossed her arms. "Words are easy. How do we know you will actually do something?" Jessica met her gaze. "Because actions speak louder than words. This officer is under investigation. If found guilty of misconduct, he will be held accountable. I am not here to protect bad cops. I am here to build a police force that truly serves this community." Murmurs spread through the audience. Some remained skeptical, but others were beginning to believe. One man stood up. "If you mean what you say, then we will hold you to it." Jessica nodded. "And you should." She had taken a risk, but it paid off. That night, Jessica sat by her bedroom window, staring at the darkened streets of Cedar View. The battle was far from over, but she was no longer alone. The community was beginning to trust her. Some officers were beginning to believe in her vision. And as long as she had breath in her body, she would keep fighting. This was only the beginning. The days following the town hall were filled with tension, but something had shifted. Jessica had taken a stand, and people were paying attention. Not everyone was on her side, but the voices of support were growing. Community members who had once avoided the police were now cautiously engaging in discussions. Even some of the more resistant officers were beginning to acknowledge that things were changing, whether they liked it or not. Jessica wasted no time in pushing forward. She expanded the training programs, introduced new community outreach initiatives, and ensured that transparency became the department's top priority. Still, the resistance persisted. One afternoon, Emma rushed into Jessica's office, her face pale. "Chief, someone vandalized the training facility." Jessica felt her stomach tighten. "Show me." When she arrived at the site, her heart sank. Spray painted across the walls in large, bold letters were the words. It was a direct attack. Jacobs clenched his fists. "This is disgusting." Jessica took a deep breath, forcing herself to remain calm. "We expected this. Change is hard, and some people fear it." Emma shook her head. "Fear is one thing. This is sabotage." Jessica turned to her officers. "Then we will not back down. We will clean this up, and we will keep moving forward." And that was exactly what they did. That night, Jessica stayed late at the facility, helping repaint the walls. She refused to let intimidation define this movement. The next morning, when officers arrived for training, they were met with a new message Jessica had written across the entrance. It was a statement, one that could not be erased. As weeks passed, Cedar View saw undeniable progress. More officers were participating in training. Reports of excessive force were decreasing. And most importantly, the public was beginning to believe in the possibility of change. But then, a crisis struck. One night, a call came in about a robbery in progress. When officers arrived, they found a suspect, a black man, standing outside the store. Instead of de-escalating the situation, one of the older officers, someone who had resisted Jessica's reforms from the start, immediately drew his weapon. "Get on the ground," he shouted. The man raised his hands. "I did not do anything." A moment of silence hung in the air. Then, Jacob stepped forward, lowering his own weapon. "Stand down," he ordered. The officer hesitated. Jacob's voice was firm. "Now." Slowly, the officer obeyed. The suspect was questioned, and within minutes, it was revealed that he was innocent, just a passerby mistaken for the perpetrator. Had Jacobs not intervened, the situation could have turned deadly. The next morning, Jessica called the officer into her office. "This is exactly what we are trying to prevent," she said, her voice measured but firm. The officer scoffed. "Things are getting too soft around here. We are supposed to be tough on crime." Jessica's eyes burned with frustration. Being tough on crime does not mean being reckless. You could have taken an innocent life last night. The officer leaned back in his chair. "Maybe Cedar View needs a chief who understands real policing." Jessica's jaw tightened. "Then maybe Cedar View needs officers who understand real justice." She handed him a formal report. "You are suspended pending an internal review. We do not tolerate misconduct in this department." The officer stormed out, slamming the door behind him. Jessica exhaled. This was not just about policies. It was about uprooting a broken system. And she would not stop until the job was done. Hashtag hope on the horizon. Despite the setbacks, Jessica's reforms continued to take shape. The department launched a mentorship program, pairing younger officers with experienced mentors who embraced the new vision. Community workshops became a staple, providing a platform for open dialogue between residents and law enforcement. One evening, at a workshop, an elderly woman stood up to speak. Jessica recognized her, Mrs. Carter, a longtime resident who had once been skeptical of the police. "I have lived in Cedar View for over 50 years, she began. "And for most of that time, I have been afraid of the people meant to protect us." She paused, her eyes meeting Jessica's. "But today, for the first time, I feel like that might be changing." The room fell silent. Then, a soft murmur of agreement spread through the crowd. Jessica felt a lump in her throat. This was why she fought. As the workshop ended, a young woman approached her. "I want to join the force," she said. "Because of you." Jessica smiled. "Then we will make sure you become the kind of officer this community deserves." For the first time in months, Jessica allowed herself to breathe. Change was happening. It was slow. It was painful. But it was real. And it was only the beginning. As weeks passed, Cedar View continued to evolve. The workshops Jessica introduced were not just about discussing concerns. They became spaces where real change took root. One afternoon, Jessica attended a session in a local community center. The small room was filled with residents of all ages. Some had always supported her efforts, while others remained skeptical. "I have seen too many promises broken," an older man in the back said. "How do we know this is not just another one?" Jessica met his gaze. "Because we are not just talking. We are taking action. Officers are being retrained, policies are changing, and accountability is becoming the new standard. A young mother raised her hand. I want to believe that my son will grow up feeling safe, not afraid. Jessica's heart ached at the truth in those words. That is why we are here, she said, so that future generations will not have to live in fear. Officer Jacobs, who had been attending these workshops regularly, stood up. I joined this force because I wanted to help people. I know that trust has been broken, but I promise you, there are officers who care, and we are listening. His words carried weight. The crowd murmured in quiet agreement. Little by little, the wall of mistrust was beginning to crack. Not everyone was happy about the changes. Within the department, a faction of officers still resisted. Some had left altogether, unwilling to adapt to the new expectations. Others stayed, but their resentment was evident. Jessica knew she had to address this directly. She called a department-wide meeting. Standing before her officers, she took a steady breath. I know that change is difficult, but let me be clear. Our job is to serve this community with fairness and integrity. That is not negotiable. Silence filled the room. Then, a voice spoke up. Chief, some of us have been here a long time. We have done things a certain way for years. Why should we suddenly change? Jessica did not hesitate. Because the way things have been done is not working, and we have the power to make it better. She scanned the room. No one is being asked to abandon their duty. But we will no longer tolerate outdated practices that put lives at risk. A few officers shifted uncomfortably, but others nodded. Emma spoke up. We all took this job to protect people. Now we have a chance to do it the right way. For the first time, Jessica saw a shift, not just in policies, but in mindsets. The resistance had not disappeared, but its grip was weakening. One evening, Jessica returned home later than usual. The weight of the day pressed down on her as she stepped into her small but welcoming house. She sank into a chair by the window, looking out at the quiet streets of Cedar View. The work was exhausting, but as she reflected, she realized something. People were changing. The department was changing. And most importantly, hope was returning to Cedar View. The journey was far from over. But for the first time, Jessica truly believed they were on the right path. As the changes within Cedar View's police force became more evident, the public slowly began to notice the difference. Officers were more present, not just as enforcers of the law, but as protectors of the people. The shift in behavior did not go unnoticed. I feel safer seeing officers act more responsibly, a Cedar View resident shared in an interview. They are not just here to exert authority, but to ensure fairness. That is what true policing should be. These words were proof that trust, once shattered, was beginning to mend. But Jessica knew that this was only the beginning. The resistance within the force had not completely disappeared. Some officers still clung to their old ways, unwilling to embrace the change. Others complied only because they had to, not because they truly believed in the new direction. Jessica reminded herself, this is just the start. We will face opposition, but real change is happening. Her faith in the mission only strengthened. She was no longer fighting alone. Officers like Emma and Jacobs had become key allies, standing beside her in the pursuit of reform. Their dedication gave her renewed energy. She gathered her team for a meeting. Standing before them, she spoke with quiet determination. We are building a police force that people can trust. Real change does not happen overnight, but small actions lead to big transformations. Today, we take another step toward a fairer system for everyone. The first phase of reform had been a success, but Jessica knew that the road ahead would be long, filled with challenges and setbacks. Yet, she refused to waver. She had proven that one person could ignite change. Now, it was up to Cedar View to decide if it would truly become a symbol of reform. Jessica understood that internal reform within the police force was only one part of the solution. To create lasting change, the relationship between law enforcement and the community had to be rebuilt. Policing should never be an isolated institution. It had to be integrated with the people it served. Determined to strengthen this bond, Jessica launched a series of community engagement workshops, open forums where residents could voice their concerns, fears, and hopes about the police force. These workshops were held in different parts of Cedar View, ensuring accessibility for all residents. Jessica personally attended each one, leading discussions and answering questions directly. She made it clear from the start, "I am not here just to speak. I am here to listen. Tell me how you feel about the police force, about our work, about what needs to change. Your insights will help shape our future." The meetings were raw and emotional. Some residents arrived with deep-seated anger and mistrust, while others carried painful memories of past injustices. An elderly woman stood up at one session, her voice trembling as she spoke. "I have spent my whole life believing that the police only protect the powerful. But today, I feel like maybe we can build something different." Her words resonated deeply with Jessica. They were a reminder that this fight was not just hers. It belonged to the entire community. The workshops also provided a platform for officers to engage with the public. Some came to explain their work, while others simply listened. During one session, Officer Jacobs posed a question to the audience. "What can we do to serve you better?" It was not just a rhetorical question. It was a sign of a changing mindset. The dialogues were difficult at times, but they were necessary. They allowed Jessica and her team to understand what truly mattered to the community. At one session, a middle-aged man, who had once been vocal in his criticism of the police, stood up and said, "I never thought I would see the day when officers would actually come to us and listen. But today feels different." His words reaffirmed everything Jessica had been fighting for. As the community workshops continued, something remarkable happened. Residents who had once viewed the police as an adversarial force began to see them as allies. The change was slow, but undeniable. Jessica could feel the shift in Cedar View's atmosphere. The fear, though not completely gone, was less suffocating. The resentment, though still present, was beginning to ease. And most importantly, a young woman approached Jessica after a session, her voice filled with conviction. "If we keep working together, we can fix this system." Jessica smiled. "That is exactly what we are going to do." Of course, not everything was smooth sailing. There were still officers who resisted the reforms. There were still policies that needed to be refined. And there were still moments when Jessica wondered if the change she fought for would truly last. But she could not deny one simple truth. One evening, after a long day, Jessica returned home. She sat by her bedroom window, gazing out at the quiet streets of Cedar View. The soft glow of streetlights cast long shadows. But for the first time, those shadows did not feel as ominous. Jessica rested her head on her hand, reflecting on the journey so far. The workshops, the community voices, the struggles within the department. It had all been exhausting. But as she looked out at the town she had sworn to protect, she knew one thing for certain. This fight was worth it. Change had begun with a single confrontation on a highway. 2 officers had been challenged, and in that moment a movement was born. Jessica Simpson, Cedar View's police chief, had refused to accept the status quo. Her decisive actions had set off a chain reaction. But the question remained, would Cedar View's transformation continue? Or would old systems regain control? That answer lay in the hands of the people. What do you think? Can one person truly make a difference in an entrenched system? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this story inspiring and engaging, do not forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more compelling content. See you in the next video.